name is Sніжана Палащенко, and this is podcast Не сплю, працюю, which means I don't sleep, I work. This podcast is created with UKU Business School, Ukrainian Catholic University Business School, and Радіо Треба. So I have a good guest now here in our studio. It's Кайл Ґалагор. Hi, Kyle.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Kyle is the owner of company SCG Desing Group. So you relocate your business from Ireland to Ukraine. And I want to ask you here, after 1 year of full-scale war in Ukraine, do you manage to sleep well?
Honestly, no, I don't. This has probably been the biggest issue that I've had, or one of the biggest issues that I have had during the war, is that my sleep patterns are just destroyed. It's partly through, I guess, in the early days, nervousness. More recently, it's because of the blackouts and having to rearrange my day to work when we have electricity. So I would say, honestly, no, I haven't slept very well during the war.
I asked before another Ukrainian business owner, and they said me that now they sleep better than 21st of January. So how you manage your life now after 1 year?
Well, you adapt. You have to adapt, and I think that the biggest problem that I have has been in recent times with the blackouts. You know, because you can't work when you don't have electricity, and you find other ways to be productive during that time, but it is the hardest thing to actually maintain a business is when there's no electricity.
How was February 24 like for you, like person, and also like a businessman?
Well, I was under a bit of pressure to have a presentation ready for the 24th, and the night before I was working until 4 a.m. and I just got into bed, and I was getting ready to get into bed when I heard the news that the invasion had started, and I guess the only way I could describe it is total shock. You know, we all knew, we had been hearing for weeks ahead about this build-up of troops on the border. We all knew it was going to happen. But when it happened, it was just pure shock. And I think when I think back to it now, for maybe the first 10 days, I was just like a zombie. I existed, but I had no clear thought. It was just, my head was just foggy.
Why you didn't leave Ukraine? You know, a lot of Ukrainians did this.
I'm asked this all the time. I probably wanted to leave before the war started, and then on the morning of the 25th, I helped two of my friends from Kyiv get to the border, and we were 6 hours queuing at the border, driving there. And I saw all of these women and children with their suitcases and their plastic bags and their dogs. And I just thought, I can't go. I have to stay here. Ukraine has been my home for 8 years. I've been very happy here. I have to stay. I don't know how I can help, but whatever way I can help in any small way, I have to stay. This is my home now. And I just knew then that I had to stay. But also, you know, the other thing, when people say to me, why did you not leave? And you'll know it from being in Lviv as well. The first maybe 10 days, we didn't know what way the war was going to be. But maybe after 2 weeks, I think it became quite clear that the Russians were never going to come to Western Ukraine. And yes, we were going to have other issues with rocket attacks and other problems. But I think it became quite clear that we weren't going to have tanks rolling down our streets in Lviv. So it wasn't a hard decision to decide to stay.
Let's talk about your business. It's also an interesting story because you came here in 2014.
Yeah.
And war already been in Ukraine.
Yeah.
But only on the Easter.
Yeah.
And your business has a lot of like offices in different countries.
No,
Or not?
we only have one office based here, but we do
Okay.
work in different countries. We've worked probably in about 30 different countries, but our work is outsourcing work. So when I came here, it was to have a new challenge. I always wanted to try life in a different country. And because my work did not restrict me from coming here, I thought, let's try it. And I had been in Lviv a few times before. I had friends here. I used to come every summer for a football tournament, so I knew Lviv quite well. I didn't think when I came here at first that I would still be here perhaps 8 years later, but it did feel very much like home very quickly.
Oh, it's nice to hear. But for me, it's like very crazy when person from Ireland came to Ukraine and started their business. Because, I don't know, in Ukraine you have a lot of risks, economics, I don't know, strange neighbor.
Yeah.
And why you decide Ukraine? Not only that you love this place, love this country, maybe some economics issues. No. So why you choose to be in Ukraine?
Well, because we have an outsourcing business, and Lviv has this history, this culture of outsourcing. It's very, albeit in the IT industry rather than in the design industry. Nevertheless, it's very. People here are familiar with the idea of outsourcing. They understand that it's a good way to build a business. And for me, it honestly, it's hard to explain, but it just felt like home. Belfast, which is my hometown, and Lviv, they're very similar size, and it just felt very comfortable to me. Also, there were a lot of things about Belfast that I didn't like. One being the weather, because it's autumn, 12 months of the year. And for me, it's actually nice to come and live somewhere where we have a proper summer and a proper winter. That might seem just normal for you because it's what you know, but for me, having always lived somewhere where it's autumn, 12 months of the year, it's nice to have something like this. So, there were a lot of things drawing me here, and people who are from Lviv and know Lviv, they know that it's a very vibrant city. There's great restaurants and bars, there's great culture. And generally, my quality of life is much higher here than it was when I was in Belfast.
Wow. Interesting. I want to come back to February 24.
Yeah.
About your workers. So, are they Ukrainians? And what you said them, or what they say you in these first weeks?
Yeah, well, I did have a small team of designers who worked for me, and they were actually based not in Lviv, but in and around Kyiv, and they left because they had to leave. The invasion started on Thursday morning. By Saturday, they were gone, and it wasn't. I stayed in touch with them, and in fact, one of my team, she came with her partner and her sister and her sister's partner, and they originally went to Czechia. She's now in Canada, but they came through Lviv. And she told me her plans. She phoned me and she said, "Do you want to come with us? We'll book you a ticket on the bus." And I said, "Listen, thank you very much, but I'm going to stay here." But for me, my main concern was that they did what was right for them. And in the first few days, I think it was literally the only focus that anybody had was staying safe and getting to somewhere safe. So they didn't ask me, and I didn't. They didn't ask me, "Can I go?" It was just a case of, "We're going," and I fully understood that because nobody had any choice, and they had to go, and I was glad that they got out.
How is your business going now?
We've been quite fortunate that we haven't been. I think perhaps we're behind schedule with some of our projects, definitely. That's one problem, and that's a fact of having to rebuild the team and also the problems with the blackouts. But because some of our projects are in other countries, they weren't affected. Also because we had some projects that we were supposed to do in Lviv. They were delayed for a couple of months while everybody saw what was happening with the war. But after a couple of months, they came back online and we completed those, and they have been done now. So we haven't been too badly affected. Also, we have a second part of the business where we export furniture to the UK, and that has remained strong. And in fact, I expect that side of the business will become stronger in the future because Ukraine's position in the world is much stronger, and the opinion that, previously when you were trying to convince British companies to buy Ukrainian products, they weren't so sure. Now people are very happy to buy Ukrainian products, and I think that's
they feel themselves they support Ukraine, or
it's not so much that perhaps there was this perception before that Ukraine was people were living in the 1950s and that it was a very backward country, and now they realize, actually, no, Ukraine's a very strong country. It's a very interesting country. Ukrainians are strong people. They see Ukrainian people interviewed on television, from children aged 6 right up to adults, and they all speak great English. And suddenly this whole perception of Ukraine as a country I think has changed in a very positive way. And so to do business between Ukraine and the UK is becoming much easier to do.
Oh, it's interesting to hear from you this. How Ukrainians now in Lviv ask you to create them outdoor landscape? Like war, I don't know, you never know when rockets will come. And to think about the landscape, for me, it's something strange.
Perhaps, but it's important to understand that we work on commercial projects, not on private projects. We can do private projects, but generally it's not. And so we're working for businesses, and as you know, that businesses in Ukraine, many businesses have relocated from other parts of the country to Lviv. That businesses in Lviv, a lot of them are not suffering for the war. In fact, they're doing quite well. And so us as a B2B company, we haven't so far been greatly affected by the war. Hopefully it will stay that way. But at the moment, I think the signs are positive.
Oh, thank you. So I will, Oh, okay. So what lessons the war teach you, like a person and also like a businessman in Ukraine?
Oh, well, firstly, as a person, I think it teaches you not to delay, because you don't know what the future is going to bring, and it makes you think, I need to live more. But then the other side of that is that while that is the lesson from the war, it's very difficult to actually do that during a war. And so perhaps it's a lesson that I'm learning, that I will be in a better position to actually act on it once the war is over. So, I think if it's one thing, it's live more and don't delay. As a businessman, I think you have to learn to adapt. You have to learn to adapt very quickly, and I think what's the most important thing to do is to keep your clients updated at all times. We have clients at the moment in India, and they see the news, but they don't perhaps understand that we don't have electricity for long parts of the day, and really it's important to keep the communication strong, to let them understand that to produce the work that they need us to produce, it might take slightly longer than we had expected, but we can still do it and we will still do it. So I think it's important to be able to do that. It's important to adapt. I've had a complete turnover in my team, so I'm having to get used to working with new people again, and that has its challenges. But I've had the business now for nearly 30 years, and things like the credit crunch and there are things that have happened in my business history that have taught me lessons that I can apply now, that you just have to adapt, and you don't know what tomorrow will bring, literally.
Thank you. It's interesting. And you said that you answer your clients outdoors that we haven't electricity, so don't worry, but we will do this work which we say you. And how for you is the better way to communicate clear with your clients about some risks?
Generally, I do it by email because, with time differences and things like that, that if I send them an email, they can read it when they're at the, I might have electricity in the middle of the night, and I can only send the email when I have the electricity. But then when they come into the office the next morning, they'll see it. So, sometimes we do use Zoom and WhatsApp and the usual tools, but I prefer to do everything by email. And the other thing which I've learned a long time ago about communication by email is nobody can say, oh, but I thought you were going to do this, or I thought you were going to do that. When it's in an email, it's there. It's a clear transcript of what was agreed, and nobody can go back, and there can be no misunderstandings. So when I'm dealing with foreign clients, we make sure everything's done by email.
What do you tell your friends, your business partners, why you stay in Ukraine at first time?
Before the war...
And what they say you ask?
Yeah. Well, before the war started, they all wanted me to leave. And when the war had just started, they wanted me to leave. But when they realized I wasn't going to leave, they worry about me, but they trust me. And they stay in touch. Whenever there are rocket attacks on Lviv, I always make sure, once everything has calmed down, to send a message to a couple of family members back home just to say, if you see it on the news, rocket attacks in Lviv, we're all okay and everything's fine. And I also had to explain to my brother at one time in the past that if you hear there are rocket attacks in Lviv and you can't contact me, 99% that's because there's no communication. It's not because, and I said, I know it's easy to say, but try not to worry, because it probably just means that there's no communication lines. It doesn't mean that anything bad has happened to me. And so he understands that now, and it's all quite calm.
How you mobilize yourself at first weeks and now that to help Ukrainians to make our victory more close?
Well, as I said to you, on the day after the war started, and I took my friends to the border, and I saw how much was going to need to be done. Really, nothing was planned. Everything just happened because it happened, and first of all, I started to get a lot of messages from people at home saying, our church wants to help, or our business wants to help, or our local council is doing a collection for Ukraine. How should we do this? And probably for about the first 6 weeks of the war, I spent most of my time online talking to people in the UK and talking to people in Ukraine and trying to put the two parts together. The people in the UK wanted to help, but they didn't know what help was needed. They didn't know how to get aid that they had collected, perhaps in Northern Ireland. How are we going to get it to people in Ukraine? And I spent a lot of time involved with that to make sure that I was putting the two sides together. Also, there were people in Northern Ireland who wanted to open their homes to Ukrainian refugees, and I was helping people from Ukraine to partner up with people in Northern Ireland and to move there. And that really was almost full time for the first 6 weeks, because once I started to make contact with people, then other people would share my details and say, oh, speak to Kyle, he's in Lviv, he'll help you with this. And it did become, in a little way, it did become overwhelming. And after about 6 weeks, I had to think, I still need to help. I need to help in whatever way I can, but I can't just do this 16 hours a day forever, because I had my own business. I have responsibilities to my clients, responsibilities to my team. And I had to then think, I'll still help, but it's going to have to be in a different way. And so my business partner, he's Ukrainian, although he's brought up in the UK, he's of Ukrainian background, and he had a lot of contacts both in UK and Ukraine. And I started more to help him rather than to actually do anything myself. And so I've kind of worked with him since then. And, he'll message me and say, oh, you need to come to the store and help us unpack a delivery, or I need you to go to Premishal and get something. And because obviously I can go across the border where some Ukrainians can't. So I just really help out now in his team whenever we can do it. And between us, I happened to, through a friend of a friend in the UK, they had a small team that wanted to bring cars and aid from England to UK, and we've kind of formed a neat little team now who bring in a lot of. They brought now, I think, about 14 cars, and the cars always come loaded with medical aid. But what they do, which I think is very important, is they ask the people in Ukraine, "What do you need?" and then they go and find it. No matter how difficult it is to find, somehow they manage to find it, because I think, we all know that at the start, people were sending over boxes and boxes of pasta and toilet rolls and things like that. And we're always grateful for any help, but the guys at the front, they need different things, And at least now, our small team in England, they listen to what is being asked for, and they find it, whether that's generators, whether it's particular medical equipment, whether it's parts for drones. No matter what we have asked them to find, somehow they've always managed to find it.
Do your team, or are some teams now in from? Some members of your team maybe is in a front line, or your friends. Have you communicate with them or support them?
Yeah, none of our team are at the front line, but I do have friends that are there. Thankfully, so far, all of my friends that are there are still safe. I don't contact them directly, although I have seen some of my friends who have been fighting, and then when they have come back, I have met up with them. But I don't actively seek to stay in contact with my friends at the front, because that's their responsibility, shall I say. Maybe responsibility is the wrong way. It's up to them to contact people as and when they can. For example, I have one friend who's fighting at the front, and his parents don't know that. They think he's training soldiers at a training camp in Western Ukraine, but he's not. And, if he doesn't want his family to know, it's not fair for me to intrude in his privacy and try to ask how things are. People tell you what they feel it's safe to tell you, and I think that's how it should be.
When I been in France, and I tried to explain my classmates about war in Ukraine, I always saw them the picture on Instagram of my friends. She's a hospitalier, so I saw them. Look, she is 21 years, and her life before full scale been like you. Party, families, she enjoyed her life, and now saw her photos. So she's in form. She's like a soldier, and her face now is different.
Yeah.
And that's this way they know another face of the war.
Yeah.
And I think in your situation, it could be something the same. You can speak to 1, 2, 3 persons and explain them from your personal experience how look like war or not.
Yeah, and I think it's you need to be very careful sometimes when you're talking. When I talk to people in the UK and they ask what it's like, you need to be very careful how you explain it from my situation, because obviously we live under a threat of rocket attacks, etc. But you know, my experience of the war is quite soft compared to a lot of other people who have had very difficult experiences, who've maybe been fighting and who've been exposed to fighting, who've maybe lost relatives, who have relatives who have become disabled. You know, for me, I need to explain that it's difficult, but I also need to explain it carefully that it's more difficult for other people than it is for me. I don't like to make it sound like, oh, it's so terrible for me, because I'm one of the lucky ones. I'm in Lviv. I've not exposed to the fighting. And but I see a lot of it, and we all see it. And a couple of days ago, I had to be in the hospital, and you know, you see everywhere in the hospital these young guys, and their limbs are missing, and you know, it's quite upsetting for me to say that, to see this, but their life, it hasn't changed my life. It's changed their lives. It's changed their families' lives, and I think it's important for me to explain to people that it's very difficult here for other people, but I'm lucky and it's not so difficult for me, because I wouldn't want people to think that, oh, you know, he's complaining about the war. He doesn't have to complain because he can leave. And so I just need to be very careful when I'm explaining it to people. But it's interesting what you say about somebody's face has changed in 1 year, and I think we only need to look at the president to see how your face can change so quickly.
I want to come back for your business. It's not only outdoor landscape design.
Yeah.
And you have, before full-scale war, you have some plans what you will be do in 2023.
Yeah.
2022.
Yeah.
And how is your plan now? And could you say that something changed or not?
Well, the plans are still there. And it really goes back to something I said earlier on, that it makes you understand that you can't delay with your plans, that you need to get on with things and keep moving. But it's not so easy to do that from a practical point of view when your team is constantly evolving, when you have blackouts, when you have other difficulties and other responsibilities away from work. But the ambitions are still there. The one thing that I kind of feel was an important part of our plans before the war, which is now even more important, is the side of our business which helps Ukrainian companies export to the UK. Because before, when we wanted to do that, we saw that there were opportunities. Now it goes beyond opportunities. There's a necessity for this. Ukrainian companies who have the ability to export, they need to be doing it, because there's not going to be the same home market. And I feel that perhaps what we will focus on more, certainly in 2023. Some of the other plans that I had to expand the business will be parked for a while, and we'll focus a lot more on helping Ukrainian companies to export.
Wow, and how you doing this? Like,
Well, at the moment, we're working with a number of companies in various industries, but I think how we can help is that we understand what businesses in the UK are looking for. And when a company in Ukraine wants to export their products, for example, we're working at the moment with a furniture company, and they wanted to export their products to the UK. And some of their products are perfect for the UK market, but some of them are totally different, because furniture styles in the UK and Ukraine are very different, because people in the UK live in houses with more space. In Ukraine, people tend to live in apartments where space has to be planned more carefully. So the style of furniture is quite different. So when they said to me, this is our furniture we want to export to the UK, I looked through it and I said, okay, well, these items will be very popular in the UK. These, forget it, nobody will want them. So we need to redo your catalogue. We need to perhaps do an English-speaking, an English language website that only features the products which are going to sell. Then what we did is we showed them the products which are popular in the UK, which they could make, which they're not currently making. And I said to them, you need to prototype these, you need to develop these, because these will sell in the UK. So what we're doing is, we have a lot of contacts in the UK, we have a lot of experience of doing business there, but we're in perhaps a unique position that we can see things from a British perspective, and we can also see it from a Ukrainian perspective, and we can bring those two things together. It also helps that some British business people would be nervous about doing business with Ukrainians in the first instance, not when they get to know them, and not when they perhaps have had several deliveries and everything arrives on time and it arrives to the standard that they expect. Then it's fine. But perhaps their initial perception is that it's more comfortable if we're dealing with British people who live in Ukraine than they feel more confident in us to be able to iron out any problems that there might be. So, that gives us an advantage in doing that as well. And Ukraine has a lot of great things to export, and I think it's important that we help that they do that, because the economy is going to take a long time to recover. There's a lot of rebuilding to be done, both physically in infrastructure and in buildings, but also in businesses. And, I think it's important to focus on that. And so that will probably be our main area of focus for 2023.
Oh, thank you. It's really important. Like a couple weeks ago, I studied international marketing, and we looked for some products which we want to sell in different countries.
Yeah.
So now you explain me these rules of business, that you must think about behaviors of people from different countries.
Yeah.
Before you came with your products.
Yeah, and you do. There's small differences in culture between UK and Ukraine, but sometimes those small differences make a big impact when you're trying to do business. And so I think because we're familiar with both cultures, that it helps us to put the two sides together.
Also, I know that you think about landscape school.
Yeah.
And could you explain what you want to teach here in Ukrainians?
Yeah, well...
And why you think that we need this?
Well, why is very easy question to answer. That in UK, USA, Sweden, Germany, countries like this, to become a landscape architect, you need 7 years full-time study. In Ukraine, At university, it's 4 years, but that's fine. The bigger problem is that there are private schools here which sell courses and say that in 3 months they can make you become a landscape architect. And the problem with that is obvious, that if it takes 7 years in other countries, you can't condense that into 3 months. It's impossible. So the problem that means is that there are a lot of people who are claiming to be a landscape designer, landscape architect, but they're not in terms of the international context. They don't have the skills, they don't have the knowledge. And that problem just keeps repeating. And I had a conversation, I spoke at a conference of property developers in Kyiv about 3 or 4 years ago. And I said to them, you never employ landscape architects for your projects. You don't put any effort into the outside of your buildings. And they said, well, it's because we've tried in the past and the results weren't good, so we just don't try anymore. And that problem goes round and round. Now, in the last 2 or 3 years, I see, even with the war, I see big, big improvements. It's getting a lot better, but there's still a long way to go. And there's a perception sometimes that things that are done in the USA and UK are better than they're done in Ukraine. And that perception isn't really true. But in terms of landscape design, it definitely is true. And I think it's important that if Ukraine wants to become fully a part of Europe and a member of the EU, there are certain standards that need to be met. And in terms of street design, city design, obviously a lot of our cities now will have to be rebuilt and from the very start. But even cities like Lviv, which are, haven't been affected by the war, the standard of design of our streets, of our cities and in Western Ukraine are not to the standard of European, and we need to bring that standard up. And so my first motivation for the school was because I couldn't get staff who were properly trained. I would place adverts for jobs and people would send me their CV and they would send me their work, and I would look at it and I would think, I can't send this type of work to my clients in other countries. And like I say, it has got much better in the last couple of years. It really has, and I don't know who to thank or who's responsible for that, but it is definitely improving. But it's still a long, long way to go. And whether the school is a big ambition of mine, I think it's going to be needed more than ever after the war. Whether it ever gets off the ground or not, I don't know, because there's just so much work involved in setting up a school like this. And although I really would like to do it, I don't know how feasible it's going to be.
Okay, it's important, I think, after war to have a good new landscape design, and it's good change to change. Okay, and it's also good way to change our mindings, how it must look like, because I think that I know good design landscape companies also from Lviv, some guys, and I think you also know this community. And how this community talk with each other?
Well, I think, it is actually quite a friendly industry. I think while there's competition between different companies, I find that the industry is quite, it's a small industry. Everybody knows everybody else, whether they're from Odessa or Kharkiv or Kyiv or Lviv, everybody knows everybody else. And there is this general level of support for one another. There's not so much, maybe other people would see it differently to me, but I don't feel that there's this, big competition that people want to outdo each other. But I also think that perhaps for this reason, there's a slight level of complacency, that people look at the standards and they think that something is good enough, whereas it's not really good enough. And when I go to other cities, I see things improving much more quickly than they are in Lviv, unfortunately. And I'm not quite sure why that is, but you know, 5 years ago, to say that there was anywhere in Ukraine where there was like a public landscape project that was on a level with those in the rest of Europe, maybe 5-6 years ago, there wasn't. But now there are a few. Sadly, there are only a few, but there are projects that I have seen firsthand in Kyiv, in Dnipro. There's another one which I haven't seen firsthand, but I'm familiar with in Kharkiv. And they're as good as anything that you'll see in the UK or USA or Western Europe. But in Lviv, we don't have anything to that standard yet. Again, it is getting a little bit better here, and there are some good companies here. But a lot of it comes down to the client as well. You know, you could be the best landscape designer in the world. You could have the best ideas. You could have the best team to help you do it. You're only ever going to be as good as your client. And if your client doesn't have ambitions, doesn't have knowledge of what it makes a good project and what makes a bad project, doesn't have the budget for it, it doesn't matter how good you are as a designer, you're only as good as your client.
Oh, yeah. It's also an interesting point. And my last question, it's about yourself.
Yeah.
Why you find... Oh, and I will use this. Відновлення, you know? I know this words in Ukraine, відновлення, recover. So, how do you recover? How do you recover, and where do you get your strength?
I don't know how to answer that. I don't really know what to say to that. I don't even really know that I do recover. I think perhaps we all feel it when we're living through the war, that you just have to keep going. You keep going because you have to. There is no other choice. You can't take a break. You can't take a break from trying to do your work. You can't take a break from, you know, if you're involved with volunteering. The war doesn't stop. It doesn't wait. So I don't really know what to say to you on that. I just keep going because I have to keep going. And in terms of recovery, I'll do that after our victory. That'll be the time to have recovery. For now, just keep going.
Okay, thank you. So, thank you, Kyle, for this good interview. And
well, thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you for being here in our podcast. It's been podcast Не сплю, працюю, I don't work, sleep. And you can hear all our podcast in Ukrainian. This is one special with Kyle. He came to Ukraine from Ireland and doing here his business, outdoor landscape design. And if you want to support Ukrainians wherever you are, in the street, you just can say, I support you, or try to do something. That's all.